The F4U Corsair dominated Pacific skies with an alleged 11-to-1 kill ratio, supposedly earning the nickname Whistling Death from terrified Japanese forces. But newly discovered Japanese intelligence reports, pilot testimonies, and combat records reveal shocking truths that shatter everything we thought we knew. The real story isn't about fear. It's about respect, tactical adaptation, and propaganda that fooled the world for decades. What Japan actually thought about America's bent-wing bird will surprise you. The most enduring legend about the F4U Corsair crumbles under scrutiny. Despite decades of repetition in books, documentaries, and museums, Japanese forces never called the Corsair Whistling Death. This moniker was actually concocted by Vought's publicity department and has been misattributed ever since. Japanese sources do not support this claim, and the aircraft was mainly known as the Sikorsky. Research through Japanese wartime records, unit logs, diaries, and even POW interrogations reveals no equivalent term in Japanese literature. The Japanese equivalent exists nowhere in Japanese literature, wartime records, or even POW interrogations. The relentless repetition of this fabrication somehow acquired the status of historical fact, demonstrating how effective marketing can become accepted history. Some Japanese pilots regarded it as the most formidable American fighter, but they had their own terminology rooted in technical assessment rather than fear-based nicknames. Japanese intelligence reports focused on performance characteristics, construction details, and tactical vulnerabilities rather than dramatic epithets. The truth is more complex than Hollywood mythology suggests. Japanese aviation culture emphasized technical analysis over emotional responses. Their documentation style reflected samurai-influenced professionalism. They respected worthy opponents without dramatizing encounters. This cultural difference explains why American propaganda found fertile ground in contrast to Japanese military stoicism. This manufactured legend reveals how wartime publicity shaped post-war historical narratives. Vought's marketing department created compelling mythology that sold newspapers and built American morale, but it wasn't based on enemy accounts. The real Japanese perspective shows sophisticated tactical understanding rather than terror-induced nicknames. But if they didn't fear the Corsair's sound, what did Japanese intelligence reports actually reveal about their analysis of America's bent-wing fighter? When an F4U Corsair was captured near the Kasumigaura flight school, Japanese specialists were surprised there were places on the wing covered with fabric. This discovery shocked Japanese engineers who expected America's most advanced fighter to be entirely metal. The Japanese captured 2 F4Us from forced landings late in World War II and fixed one to flying condition, conducting various flight tests and being impressed by the materials used in construction and the flight performance. Japanese aviation technical intelligence operated methodically from their center at Tachikawa. Navy Lieutenant Toyota Takago worked in the Foreign Technology Program, and the Japanese Army sent out most field teams, subsequently supplying the JNAF with copies of their reports and lending them aircraft as desired. When they examined captured American aircraft, they found technological approaches that differed dramatically from Japanese design philosophy. When they studied a TBM-1C Avenger from British carrier raids, Yokosuka's specialists were surprised at the extremely strong construction. This robust building philosophy contrasted sharply with Japanese aircraft designed for maximum performance through weight reduction. The Zero achieved maneuverability by sacrificing armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, approaches American engineers rejected. The Corsair's construction revealed American industrial capabilities that Japanese engineers both admired and envied. The fabric covering on control surfaces represented a compromise between weight and manufacturing efficiency that Japanese designers understood but hadn't prioritized. American mass production techniques allowed for such refinements while maintaining strength. Japanese technical reports compiled from flying experience and ground studies were fairly basic. because specialists were preoccupied with their own design work. Only very late in the war was a special section of 3 officers and 12 to 14 men formed just to track foreign technology. However, their analysis revealed something more troubling than advanced construction techniques, tactical revelations that would reshape Japanese fighter strategy. When researcher Michael Claringbold investigated 1943 Solomon's Air War records, it became glaringly obvious that many combat claims made from both sides verged on fiction. The Corsairs' proclaimed extraordinarily high kill advantage against the Zero might not be as generous as most publications claim. The mythical 11-to-1 ratio dissolves when Japanese unit records are consulted instead of accepting American combat claims at face value. Claringbold laid out the histories of all 673 Corsairs which served in the theater, then similarly listed every Zero combat loss from Japanese unit records. This meticulous cross-referencing revealed massive discrepancies between claimed victories and actual losses. Both sides overclaimed dramatically, but American figures became gospel while Japanese records remained unexamined. The author presents allowed claims in comparison to known losses. Eye-opening. The real combat effectiveness was impressive, but not the technological massacre portrayed in popular history. Zero Sen remained effective against the Corsair until February 1944 in the South Pacific, and during 1943, the Japanese could still hold their own against their American opponents. Japanese fighter pilots made more generous claims against the Corsair than their Allied counterparts. These increased as the war progressed, however. Once the Zero took on its opponent at lower altitudes, a skilled pilot could run rings around the Corsair using superior maneuverability. This tactical reality contradicts simplistic narratives of American technological dominance. The myth of the alleged outstanding Corsair score ratio has gained historical traction because Western historians continue to accept U.S. combat claims at face value instead of consulting the meticulous Japanese unit records which are illuminating and detailed. Language barriers and complex Japanese military organization made proper verification challenging, allowing inflated claims to persist unchallenged. But the most shocking revelation wasn't about kill ratios. It was how Japanese pilots learned to exploit the Corsair's critical weaknesses. Ken Walsh, who achieved 21 victories but lost 5 F4Us and was shot down 3 times, explained, "There were times that I tangled with a Zero at slow speed, one-on-one. In these instances, I considered myself fortunate to survive a battle." This admission from America's Corsair ace reveals the aircraft's vulnerability that Japanese pilots learned to exploit with deadly effectiveness. Japanese fighter tactics evolved rapidly once they understood the Corsair's limitations. Walsh noted, "Whoever had altitude dictated the terms of the battle, and there was nothing a Zero pilot could do to change that. We had him. The F4U could outperform a Zero in every aspect except slow speed maneuverability and slow speed rate of climb. Therefore, you avoided getting slow when combating a Zero." Smart Japanese pilots refused to play the American game. Instead of engaging in high-speed diving attacks where the Corsair excelled, they forced low-speed turning fights where Zero maneuverability dominated. In combat with an F6F or F4U, the only positive thing that could be said of the Zero at this stage of the war was that in the hands of a skillful pilot, it could maneuver as well as most of its opponents. The St. Valentine's Day massacre debacle showcased exemplary Zero-Sen fighter tactics, and American losses were of sufficient magnitude that further daylight missions toward Bougainville were discontinued until Allied fighter tactics could be improved. This early engagement demonstrated that proper tactics could negate technological advantages. The Japanese understanding of energy management and altitude control allowed skilled pilots to dictate engagement terms. They would climb to intercept altitude, force Americans to burn energy in climbing attacks, then exploit the Corsair's poor low-speed handling during recovery phases. When Corsairs were slow and vulnerable, Zeros struck with precision. But Japanese tactical innovation went beyond traditional dogfighting. They developed an entirely new approach that would haunt American pilots. During the Battle of Okinawa, Marine pilot Art Miller flew combat air patrol when USS Franklin took a direct hit from a kamikaze. Then, a second unidentified aircraft was reported entering the area. Miller spotted a Zero flying very low over the water, pursued at 300 miles per hour, and watched it cartwheel into the sea when its wingtip touched water during evasive maneuvers. This engagement typified the final phase of Corsair versus Japan combat. At war's end, Corsairs were ashore on Okinawa, combating the kamikaze, and also were flying from fleet and escort carriers. The strategic situation had shifted from conventional air superiority battles to desperate suicide attacks requiring different tactical responses. Superior Allied aircraft arrived, such as the F-6F Hellcat and F4U Corsair. The Japanese continued to fly the Zero with less and less experienced pilots, culminating in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, aka the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, losing 600 aircraft and their irreplaceable pilots. By 1945, Japan's pilot training had collapsed, forcing reliance on minimally trained kamikaze pilots. Untrained kamikaze pilots are more effective than untrained conventional pilots, and they used less fuel. It can be argued that it was the most effective tactic for the situation they found themselves in. This desperate calculation reflected Japan's recognition that conventional air combat against experienced Corsair pilots was futile with rookie aviators. The psychological impact on American pilots was significant. The Corsair was like a seasoned prizefighter who could take punches on the chin and refuse to go down. On many fighter sweeps and low-level bombing runs, airplanes would get hit repeatedly by Japanese anti-aircraft fire, but somehow always get us back to bases. However, kamikaze attacks created stress beyond normal combat parameters. Yet this desperate strategy contained one final secret that would shock American intelligence services. Lieutenant Commander Harutoshi Okamoto, the last Zero commander to defend Rabaul, introduced the Zero to the theater with number 4 Kokutai in February 1942 and now presided over the final days of the Zero at Rabaul. His importance and contribution to the battle with new U.S. types, including the Corsair, cannot be overstated. Okamoto's career spanned the entire Pacific War, making him uniquely qualified to assess American aviation development. In late 1943, Japanese Navy General Staff at Rabaul conferred on the topic of naval fighter aircraft and broached the topic of providing bullet protection for the Zero fighter, as the strategic outlook for Japan switched to defensive one. Navy staff still considered the Zero to be the best fighter at the theater, though conceded that the Corsair, with its great horizontal speed, was a match for their fighter. This admission represents remarkable professional honesty from Japanese leadership. They acknowledged that American technological progress had achieved parity with their premier fighter, despite the Zero's continued advantages in specific combat scenarios. The decision to add armor protection reflected acceptance that defensive warfare required different aircraft characteristics than the offensive operations that originally drove Zero design. Japanese pilot testimonials reveal sophisticated tactical understanding rather than fear or hatred. A skilled Japanese pilot described engaging Grumman fighters. For some strange reason, even after I had poured about 500 or 600 rounds of ammunition directly into the Grumman, the airplane did not fall, but kept on flying. A Zero which had taken that many bullets would have been a ball of fire by now. This analysis demonstrates respect for American engineering philosophy, prioritizing pilot survival over maximum performance. The ultimate Japanese assessment combined technical admiration with tactical realism. They understood that American industrial capacity would eventually overwhelm Japanese precision manufacturing, but they maintained professional respect for worthy opponents throughout the conflict. Japanese records reveal the Corsair's true impact wasn't terror, but professional respect from skilled adversaries who developed sophisticated counter-tactics. The Whistling Death legend masks a more complex story of technological competition, tactical evolution, and mutual recognition between elite aviators. Reality proves more fascinating than mythology when proper research replaces propaganda. Keep watching Heritage for more untold stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about aviation history.